Welcome everyone to the Fantasy and Betting Podcast presented by the 33rd Team. I am your host as always, Josh Larky, joined as always by my co-host, Ryan Reynolds. We're going to be recapping some week 2 action and hinting at what is to come for week 3. Let's start off with Thursday night football for week 3. We've got the 49ers against the Giants. The 49ers are minus 10.5 point favorites in this one. The game totals pretty hefty at 45.5. When looking at the 49ers, Elijah Mitchell did not have a carry on Sunday. And I think rather than panic about what we saw last week, I think he's probably going to be a little bit more involved on the short week after McCaffrey's had 22 and 20 carries in those first couple weeks. And then it's still early, but I think there should at least be some concern with George Kittle. I think you and I both thought one of these 4 guys was going to be crowded out in some fashion. And it seems like with McCaffrey, Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, George Kittle is kind of that guy. I'm not benching him yet in fantasy, but I think I'm a week or 2 away from doing so. Talk to me about what you saw from the Niners this past week.
You know, we already know this. They can win a game in any style, run game, defense, hitting you in the air with Brock Purdy now. Rams had more room to operate underneath against San Francisco than they did the previous week. I thought that was interesting. So going forward, when the 49ers are playing a bigger armed quarterback, maybe that's the new trend for them. But, you know, we'll see this week against the Giants, against the guy that I wouldn't frame as a big armed quarterback. Exactly.
I wouldn't frame him that way either. Yeah. Turning to your New York Giants, apologies. Saquon Barkley sprained his ankle. Does not seem like there's a fracture. We're going to discuss that situation in depth on tomorrow's waiver wire show, where we'll kind of outline how we're going to view the backfield until Saquon returns. Also on tomorrow's waiver wire show, we'll discuss rookie receiver Jalen Hyatt's usage, which was quite exciting in a small sample this past week. Darren Waller is what we will talk about, though, because he led the team in targets in week 1 and again in week 2. He still doesn't have a touchdown, but he did have 2 red zone targets last week. That final stat line of 8 targets, 6 catches, 76 yards at an average depth of target of 10 yards down the field, which is receiver levels. He's looking like the 4th elite fantasy tight end, where we have Kelsey, Andrews, Hawkinson, and Waller. So it's kind of what we were expecting preseason through 2 weeks. What else do you want to add about the Giants? Who were they down? Was it 21-0? I think it was 28-0 to the Cardinals and then came back to win.
Yeah, I think it was 20-0 at halftime. You know, Josh Dobbs looked like Tom Brady in the first half. It was, as a Giants fan, it was very, very hard to watch. There was discussions about, you know, maybe are we the Khalil Williams team now? Pass rush was non-existent. I'm going to bump them into the mid to late teens this week in terms of that. That was very disappointing against a very, you know, mediocre at best Cardinals offensive line. But, you know, here's the thing. They Daniel Jones scored 31 points in the second half. You know, we said at the end of one of our shows, if the Cardinals beat the Giants this week, Daniel Jones should just void his own contract. He earned to keep getting paid after that showing. But, you know, then again, I'm not really like happy about the win at all. You know, like, yeah, great. You beat Arizona by 3 points and you had to score 31 points in the second half. That does not bode well for this week against San Francisco team who could cover the over on their own potentially. And one last thought, I actually think Jalen Hyatt's the most dynamic pass catcher on the team already.
Wow. Yeah. Bold take. We'll talk about that more tomorrow, but some of the usage is starting to back that up. And if you're not already, make sure that you hop on Twitter/X and follow Ryan Reynolds at Ryan Reynolds NFL, because he watches every snap of every game and still lives to tell about it. And for that, we applaud him so far. We take it week by week.
Yeah, we'll see.
Let's now turn to the Sunday slate. We've got the Patriots against the Jets. Nice little AFC East divisional matchup. Jets are 2-point underdogs in this one. Total's nice and low. I mean, Mac Jones, Zach Wilson, 37.5 points. Looking at the Patriots, Kendrick Bourne's now led the team in targets in both games. He's actually pacing for 170 targets on the season. His previous career high through 6 years was 74. I'm still inclined to believe this is just a phase, but I think another week or 2, and then I will fully be on board with we are starting Kendrick Bourne every week in fantasy. And then Hunter Henry is a top 12 fantasy option moving forward, maybe even a top 8 option with at least 5 catches, 52 yards, and a touchdown now in both games. What else did you see from the Patriots in what ended up being a relatively close game, all things considered, last night?
Yeah, I mean, I've liked Mac Jones more than most. He's a quick processor. He's accurate in the short to intermediate game. He's been rock solid through 2 weeks. In particular, he's been really good again in pressure management against two pretty good defenses in the Eagles and the Dolphins. That said, at the end of the day, the Patriots simply lack difference makers on offense. So I think that just limits the ceiling of this offense, at least for now.
Brees Hall and Dalvin Cook combined for 8 carries and 16 rushing yards against Dallas. The floor for every Jets player is pretty terrifying with Zach Wilson. I think the Patriots qualify as a matchup to be concerned in some ways. So I'll let people know where I'm ranking these guys in fantasy on the Thursday show. And then one other trend that I did not like was Dalvin Cook, Brees Hall, and Michael Carter played 16, 15, and 15 snaps, respectively. This is as three-headed as it gets when they're all literally within one snap of each other. And then the last thing I'll note is you should be selling Garrett Wilson in fantasy football. And you might be like, oh, yeah, of course. But guys, he's pacing for 110 targets, 60 catches, 995 yards. That is barely startable, but he's pacing for 17 touchdowns. Nearly 1 in 3 catches has been a touchdown. That trend is not going to continue. My expected fantasy points model has him wide receiver 39 per game. He has been scoring wide receiver 22. Wide receiver 22, startable each week. Wide receiver 39 is not. I think regression is going to hit him like a freight train in the near future. What else do you want to add about the Jets, where this was the first game that Zach Wilson had a week to prepare as the starter?
The Jets defense didn't have a great game, but they were also on the field for the goal game. They had a non-functional offense with Zach Wilson. Outside of Garrett Wilson breaking a 3-yard slant for 60-plus yards and a score, they literally did nothing on offense the whole day. And, the problem there is the Cowboys have one of the best pass rushers in the league. The Patriots aren't quite in that realm, but they're also a premium defense themselves. Another tall order this week for the Jets offense.
Let's turn to what should be a fun NFC battle between the Lions and Falcons. Lions 4-point favorites. Game totals 45.5. And if you like the under on this game, my bookie has it at 47. Promo code 33team when you sign up. They are a sponsor of the show, and we also like to line shop. So just going to point that one out. There we go. Let's get that little nice overlay graphic. All right, everyone. Turning to the Lions. David Montgomery has a thigh injury. We'll discuss that more on the waiver wire show tomorrow. Jahmyr Gibbs led the team last week with 9 targets. We'll discuss more on the waiver wire show how we expect usage to go, but I think that was a very, very encouraging sign for Gibbs to be in the, quote, Alvin Kamara role. And then we're also going to discuss Josh Reynolds on the waiver wire show tomorrow as well. So I'm going to withhold most Lions fantasy thoughts for tomorrow midday, but you are legally allowed to talk about the Lions right now. What did you see from this team overall?
Well, first I'll say I had the Lions ranked 9th last year in power rankings, and people were losing their minds on me because they beat the Chiefs by 1 and scored 14 points of offense. I think we saw against Seattle that, this team's good. It's trending up, reliable team to a degree, but they lost to the Seahawks at home. They're still, this is not a slam dunk Lions team. That said, Jared Goff made a number of very high difficulty throws last week. DK Metcalf was killing them early. He had an injury situation in that contest, but I'd say big athletic receivers against this Lions defense, still something we should be targeting against them.
I agree there. Turning to the Falcons, through 2 games, Bijan Robinson's now pacing for over 1,500 rushing yards, 85 catches, and over 600 receiving yards. You are allowed to trade for him in fantasy. I wouldn't even like this is a buy high where I think the cost might even keep going up, given that he's just outplaying Algier tremendously and they're still in a relative timeshare. Drake London had a pretty nice week too. 6 catches, 67 yards, and a touchdown. But I'm still concerned about whether or not we can start any of these Falcons receivers consistently. Ryan, I'm going to ask you this question. Who is the real Desmond Ridder? Is it week 1 Desmond Ridder, who had 115 passing yards, throwing only 3.5 yards downfield on average, and rushing 1 time? Or is it the dynamic week 2 version of Desmond Ridder, who has 237 passing yards, throws the ball 7.5 yards downfield on average, which is pretty normal, and then runs 10 times for 39 yards and a touchdown? Who is the real Desmond Ridder? Because right now, I don't want to start any of these Falcons pass catchers until I find that out.
Well, I think long term, I hope the answer is closer to option 2, although I think I'm going to throw the word dynamic out the window here. I think that's a little aggressive. But yeah, I mean, some of their passing game too came because they were in a negative gain script late. But yes, they should throw more. They still ran the ball. I think it was 45 times if you include Ritter's carries. So I think they should still be run centric. Maybe a little bit closer to balance though. And here's the real positive for the Falcons. Defense was good. Gave up 224 yards of total offense against a decent Packers team.
Let's turn to Commanders Bills. Commanders are 7-point dogs. Total is 44.5 points. When we look at the running back room, Brian Robinson has now outtouched Antonio Gibson 40-9 through 2 weeks. One other thing of note, this is just a fun stat. I don't know if it means anything yet, but I think it shows how balanced this pass attack has been. No Washington player has reached 55 receiving yards in either game. But get ready for this, Ryan. 7 different Washington players have reached 40 receiving yards in a game. I'll say that one more time. This is my favorite stat of the week. No Washington players reached 55 receiving yards in a game. 7 different ones have reached 40, and each of them did it once. This is actually blowing my mind. It's probably blowing the listeners' minds. I can see the wheels turning in your head.
Sure.
Is this an offensive scheme issue? Is this a Sam Howell problem? I thought he looked a little better this past week, but he's still not really where you want him to be for like the Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson enthusiasts out there.
Yeah, agreed. One thing I'll say is it's like this game was 2 different games rolled into one. You know, the first 3 quarters, like, okay, this is kind of what I was expecting. Rocky start again for Sam Howell in his 3rd career start. Then all of a sudden they have 35 points on the board. It's like, how did that happen exactly? And to your point about the distribution, I think not being reliant on any one player is a good thing for your offense, but that is a super surprising stat, especially since they're kind of top heavy with McLaurin and Dotson. And this is another thing I'll throw in for Washington. They sacked Russell Wilson 7 times, so the front's still awesome. But they let Denver climb back into this game late. So Washington's still a volatile team, even though they're 2-0.
On the other side of this, we have the Bills. This was a great week for the Bills. 3 interceptions, 5 sacks taken in week 1 for Josh Allen. He comes back, 3 touchdowns, no picks, only sacked twice in week 2. The other guy of note is James Cook, the Enigma. 17 carries and 4 receptions, 159 total yards yesterday. However, Damian Harris and Latavius Murray combined for all 5 goal line carries. And while James Cook had 20 fantasy points in week 2, that's 20 fantasy points on 159 yards and 4 receptions. I think it's going to be hard for Cook to be this weekly top 15 option if he's not allowed to be on the field when the team gets near the goal line. But you mentioned it pre-show. I think I'd agree there. Like he looks noticeably faster this year and like a better player. And it's clear that they're going to feature him as sort of the number 2 in this offense after Diggs. What else do you want to add here with the Bills?
You know, Bills were in an obvious correction spot against the Raiders. Josh Allen's awesome. That's the reality of the situation. Yes, he threw 3 interceptions against the Jets defense. You know, he's going to do that every once in a while just because of how he plays. They throttled the Raiders, as you know, we basically expected that. But what's most interesting for me for the Bills is last year, before the season, I said I think their skill group's the most overrated skill group in the league. This year, they have a more well-rounded team. Gabe Davis looks healthy. I don't think he's a great player, but he can beat bad corners. Dalton Kincaid's already being mixed in a significant way. And like you said, Cook is faster. So I think the Bills have more ways that can hurt you than they have in the last couple of years.
Agreed there. Let's turn to the AFC South divisional matchup between the Jaguars and the Texans. Most sports books have Jaguars -8.5. If you like the Texans, you can get them at +9 on my bookie, promo code 33team. Now, if we turn to the Jaguars, it was Dearness Johnson, not Tank Bigsby, who had a single week 2 touch. Bigsby had 12 snaps and didn't touch the ball. I'm a little bit less sure about who the Jacksonville running back 2 is. You actually called this during the offseason. You said, I still don't think it's out of the question Dearness Johnson ends up being the number 2. I like Dearness Johnson. I wasn't fully on board with that. And I'm starting to become on board with that after what we saw in week 2. And then we talked about this all week. Do not drop Christian Kirk. The terrifying week 1 was followed by him leading the team in routes, targets, receptions, receiving yards, 14 targets, 11 catches, 110 yards, destroyed Kansas City like he has done in the past. What do you want to add here about the Jaguars?
Yeah, there was a long pass to Ridley where he stepped out of bounds and got negated by a penalty, and he dropped it. So there's still like an interesting connection there. He also ran into the goalpost in the end zone where he
Yeah, I
didn't quite
saw
look the
that.
same after that. Yeah, that's two wrinkles there. Ridley still has major upside, and we went into this. We bet on Kirk and props. Kirk just, the Chiefs struggle against the slot, and Kirk kills them. That's just the reality of the situation. Now, two things here: one positive, one negative. We mentioned this last week. Right tackle Anton Harrison struggling in pass protection. I'd say the Jaguars struggled a little bit more than I expected in general in pass protection, and their defense played well. Particularly their secondary is playing a little bit better than I expected.
If we turn to the Texans side of things, CJ Stroud, now the first rookie quarterback with 600 or more passing yards and no interceptions through week 2. Nico Collins is pacing for 170 targets, over 1,900 receiving yards. That won't continue. He's not the next Cooper Kupp, but I think he's probably an every week fantasy wide receiver 2 at this point. I think that's very exciting that it might be coming in garbage time, but it's clear that this is the most reliable option and that he and Stroud have a good connection. And then, Ryan, kicking it to you. Will this matchup against Jacksonville be a rebound game for running back Damian Harris, who has 30 touches but just 12 total fantasy points through 2 weeks?
I mean, I hope so. The thing right now with the Texans, their injured offensive line's a real problem right now. The Colts gain penetration all day, so I hope so. When he gets any kind of lane, he's effective. He's a bulldozer, but the offensive line's a genuine problem. I'm going to throw 2 more things at you real quick. Nico Collins had a 30-yard reception negated by a penalty that didn't make the play, so to speak. I think it was a formation-related penalty, so he could have actually had a bigger day if you count that. And one thing I'll say about Stroud is, like you said, he's accumulated a lot of passing yards and negative game strips. I still don't see him as a top 10 quarterback long-term in the league, but he's played well through his first 2 games, especially considering the limited supporting cast he has.
Yeah, I'd agree there. Before moving on to our next game, Ryan's power rankings are already on the site. Go to the33rdteam.com. You can see what his power rankings look like each week. That's for real NFL football. That is in many ways what's going to help power the way that Ryan bets on these games. I'll have my fantasy rankings on the site tomorrow early afternoon. And we already have the waiver wire column from Nick Bodiford on the site, along with his fantasy takeaways. Just so much good stuff going on the site. And if you tell me that you hate the internet and you only like apps, well, then download Discord and join our Discord. We're dropping prop bets in there throughout the week. We are about to hit 2,000 members after having 650 right before the season began. And I think it's for a few reasons. We answer everyone's start sits. Jordan Vanek drops incredible DFS nuggets for every single showdown slate in there. And our prop bets are hitting. I haven't counted quite yet, but I think we're both going to be up potentially like 12 units this week from just simply playing everything that we've been dropping in Discord. I put 2 things in there this morning, actually, for the Monday night Panthers Saints game, and both those lines moved significantly within 20 minutes. This is really the place to be, and everything in our Discord is free. Let's turn to Ravens versus the Colts. The spread is Ravens -8. Total is 44 points. When looking at the Ravens, Gus Edwards scored in week 2, but I still prefer Justice Hill rest of season. Justice Hill had the 3 targets out of that backfield, and actually Justice Hill had 3 of the 4 red zone carries. Gus Edwards did score on his 1 goal line attempt, but Hill also had a goal line attempt. So I think that's something to note is for everyone out there who's panicking about Justice Hill, his usage was actually a little bit better. And Lamar Jackson played, what a great game he had in week 2 against the Bengals. His average throw depth was over 9 yards, completing 73% of passes, 2 touchdown passes, no sacks taken, ran 12 times for 54 yards. Did he look as good to you in week 2 as he did on the stat sheet?
No, I'd actually say that the Ravens pass offense, it's strange. They've been effective. Like you said, he's been very efficient, but I think the ceiling is still much greater. He looks a little bit uncomfortable at times too, playing from the pocket more. So I think that's a fascinating dynamic where Baltimore's already a good offense, but the ceiling is like another tier beyond this. So that's the first takeaway I have from there. 2 quick ones now. Odell Beckham looked really good last week before his injury. Not sure how that's going to affect anything, but
he should be back week 3. That's
cool.
The report I read is it is extremely minor.
Cool. That's positive. He looked like he did with the Rams. yesterday. I was pretty impressed with that. And the defense was very good in the first half against the Bengals again. So that means they've played 6 very strong quarters of defense, and they let Joe Burrow's Bengal crawl back in the second half. There's really no shame in that.
Let's turn to the Colts. Wow, Zach Moss. Hello, sir. Bell cow. All 18 carries in that backfield, 88 yards on the ground and a touchdown. 4 targets, 4 catches, 19 yards. There was not another running back that touched the ball in this backfield. When I looked at the advanced stats, I didn't even see another running back that ever was on the field. Even this was like literally rookie year Najee Harris is what we saw from Zach Moss. Fantasy RB2 until Jonathan Taylor returns. Anthony Richardson left the game early with a concussion. He's now left. He left week 1 for a little bit, and he was ruled out of week 2. Both those times due to head injuries. He's a fantasy cheat code with the current style of play, but I'm starting to think they might dial this back and modify the game plan in some ways. When if your rookie quarterback has potentially a concussion in week 1, and then definitely a concussion in week 2, you have to change something, right?
I would think so. Like Trevor Lawrence even told him, like, hey man, stop taking so many hits. You can't do that in this league. And he's already proven to be a prophet on that front. Now, what I'll say with Richardson is he only played 2 drives. Great first drive in both phases, hit 5 different receivers that had receptions in that drive. I would say that he's much better in the seam in the middle of the field than he is on the boundary right now as a passer. So if they do lean on the aerial game more, that could be problematic for him in the short term. And then on his second drive, off a turnover on a short field, the first play was a design run for Richardson in the end zone. So yes, they probably do have to change the offense. That's probably going to hurt them immensely. Another thing I'm going to throw on 2 things actually for the people. Richardson actually threw a pass away left-handed. I thought that was really, really cool. You don't see that very often. Because he was rolling to his left and it was just easier for him. It was pretty impressive. Minshew's a really good backup. For instance, I think if he went to the Jets, he could keep their season alive. So even if Richardson misses a game with the concussion, Minshew, they're not drawn dead with Minshew completely.
I agree there. Let's turn to Dolphins versus the Broncos. Dolphins are favored by 6.5 points. Game total is nice and high at 48.5. Looking at the Dolphins, Raheem Mostert's averaging 14 carries a game to Salvon Ahmed's 3. I believe Ahmed got dinged up last night. Mostert has both goal line carries that this backfield has had on the season. One thing also is we'll be monitoring Jalen Waddle. Seems like he had a concussion in that game. He never returned, and we'll check his status throughout the week, but that's potentially concerning if the Dolphins are going to be playing with Tyreek Hill and nobody else, considering how top-heavy this pass attack is. What did you see from the Dolphins last night against the Patriots?
I'm going to zoom out a little bit first. In week 1, we saw them torch the Chargers to the air. And then in New England, they basically won that game with defense and their run game for the most part. Now we're talking about a complete team that can win games in multiple facets while also having a super high ceiling offense. You know, teams that end up in the Final Four every year look a lot like that. And, you know, I think right now that's where they are heading into a game against Denver that's very, very, very winnable.
One thing I'll add is with the Aaron Rodgers injury, this kind of opens the door, makes that path just a little bit easier for the Dolphins. Yep. If we turn to the Broncos, this is a very messy running back room. If you thought the Jets running back room was messy, this one's pretty close because Javonte Williams had 12 carries yesterday. No other running back had more than 1. But both red zone carries went to the non-Javonte Williams backs, and Samaje Perine with 1 and Jaleel McLaughlin with 1. That was quite surprising. Also, Samaje Perine led this unit in snaps. So Perine had 31 snaps. He only had 1 carry, but he ran 25 routes to Javonte Williams 11. He had 4 targets. He had the 20 receiving yards. It is, I don't know what to make of it. At this point, Javonte Williams is in week 2, he was essentially a between the 20s grinder back, where Perine was the pass catcher, and then Jaleel McLaughlin showed up for the only goal line carry in this game. I don't know what to think here. Talk to me about maybe something positive from the Broncos after they've now started 0-2 again.
You know, Russell Wilson's been pretty good through 2 weeks. There's a positive for everyone. The reason that the Broncos are 0-2 is not him. Their offensive line was a problem in this contest. We've mentioned before they gave up 7 sacks. And, you know, the reality is their defense has been the most reliable unit for a long time, probably since Peyton Manning left. And yesterday they gave up 35 points to the Sam Howell's Commanders. So, let's one foot out of the pool on the Broncos defense right now.
Yeah, I would say that if anything, this makes me a little more excited about Russ as a potential streaming option during the season if he's going to look pretty good and the defense is not. Let's now turn to Vikings against the Chargers, two of the least lucky teams in the NFL this year. I don't remember exactly the Chargers stat that's been floating around. It's something, I think the Chargers are the first team to start the season with at least 50 points scored and no turnovers, but be 0-2.
That makes sense.
Through 2 weeks.
Yeah.
They're the first team ever. So that was a fun stat floating out there for my Chargers fandom. Right now it's Vikings +1. They're at home. My bookie has it as a pick'em, so that's kind of cool. Promo code 33rd team. Game total super high as expected at 53.5. I actually might even think this game goes over that. When you look at how these two teams have played through 2 weeks, it looks like film grinder. Ryan agrees with that gut feel. We love to hear that. Looking at the Vikings, Kirk Cousins has now thrown for at least 344 yards and 2 touchdowns in both games. This is an every week fantasy quarterback one when there's a terrible defense and a terrible run game. And the only positive really with the Vikings has been that they can pass for a lot of yards. And I'd say Alexander Mattison still looks like a backup running back thrust into a starting role. We talked about that all offseason. And KJ Osborne still ran more routes than Jordan Addison. He's done that 2 weeks now, and Addison has outproduced him and looked better than him both weeks now. I would trade for Jordan Addison before he starts to explode, because I think a lot of people would be like, oh, like maybe I should sell him because he scored touchdowns. And I would say, no, I would not sell him because he has scored touchdowns. I would buy him because he is currently running significantly fewer routes than KJ Osborne, and that is bound to change. What else do you want to add about the Vikings?
First, that's J. Larky Tweets, who genuinely not only doesn't like Alexander Mattison in fantasy, but hates him as a person. Now, and so far the fantasy take's been aging pretty well, pal. Let's first I'm going to say this about the Vikings defense. They were playing a lot of soft fronts against Philly last week. I noticed that while watching it live, and I talked to our guy Jordan Vanek. Minnesota's playing a lot of 3-3-5. Him and I watched some film together, and there were a number of times where the Vikings only had 5 players in the box, and against a team like Philly with that offensive line, we saw Swift went nuts. So why I'm bringing that up now is the Chargers are kind of in a similar position offensively. They have that high ceiling passing game just like the Eagles, but they also have a premium offensive line that if they want to, they could just hand the rock off all day. If Austin Eckler doesn't play, I think this could be a Josh Kelly game. And on the other side of the ball, Minnesota's offense is dangerous as we expected. Kirk Cousins has a lot of tools on offense, and like you called, Josh, they're a one-dimensional offense because Alexander Mattison has had 0 success to this point.
Couple things I'll add on with the Chargers. Justin Herbert led all quarterbacks in air yards in week 2 with 444. That translated to over 300 passing yards and 2 touchdowns with no picks. Like you said, Josh Kelly didn't get it done in fantasy this week. I think week 3 is going to be much better. The usage without Eckler was encouraging. And reminder again to drop Gerald Everett. Told you last week, and once again this week, was not excited about how he was used. While he ran 4 more routes than Parham last week, Donald Parham actually ran more routes than Gerald Everett in week 2. Before continuing, some breaking news. Adam Schefter reporting that Saquon Barkley is out for 3 weeks with the ankle injury. Again, we will get to that on tomorrow's waiver wire show. Make sure not to miss that. We will dive in deep with that. Browns Titans. This is going to be an interesting game. Browns are currently favored by 4.5. The spread is, or the total super low at only 41.5. The Browns are going to play tonight on Monday Night Football against the Steelers. For me, I'm curious if Elijah Moore is going to have a strong game without Amari Cooper. We saw him have 7 targets and 2 carries last week. I'm expecting more this week. And I know you and I are both hoping Nick Chubb's heightened pass game involvement from week 1 continues as well. I'd say if anything, Amari Cooper being out is going to be a plus there. Anything you want to add that you're looking for tonight before we move to the Titans?
One comment about tonight, one comment about next week. Season boils down to Deshaun Watson. We'll see him on prime time tonight against a tough Steelers defense. If he looks like he did against Cincinnati, it just lowers the ceiling of this team that could be a title contender if 2020 version of Watson returns. Now, the other one is as long as Cleveland's defensive front is in good shape entering next week, they could give the Titans' shaky offensive line a lot of issues. The Chargers had an impact in that phase last week. That's one of the keys to victory next week for the Browns.
Turning to the Titans, the week one worries about Derrick Henry were overblown. He outsnapped Tajay Spears by more than 2 times in week 2. Derrick Henry had 25 carries and 4 targets. I don't know what more you want from the big dog. And Ryan, I know that you mentioned this offseason that the Titans offensive line looked like the NFL's worst unit heading into the season. Tannehill's now taken 8 sacks through 2 weeks. As someone that has watched the games as well and is more of an amateur film scout, I would say that he looks like he's under pressure constantly. Is that what you've gained from this as well? Is that this Titans offensive line is just going to be a continuous problem for Tannehill in this pass attack?
Yeah, I think coming into the year it was a liability. It still is. And, I'll frame it this way. On a play action 7-step drop, Tannehill dropped a pass right into Treylon Burks downfield. He actually had time. He was clean. On a number of other plays, that wasn't the case, and he looked like a disaster. So, yes, I think that's the biggest weakness of the team. I'm also going to add 2 things here, too. Defensive line is still the strength of the team. Just like they did last week against the Chargers, Cleveland's offensive line's a premium unit that can mitigate them, but they'll still make a bit of an impact. And with Spears played a little bit early, though. He's actually still playing a little bit more than I would have expected. Like you said, Derrick Henry's role's outrageous. The big dog is still the big dog. But, they gave Spears 2 carries on 3rd down in the first drive, which I thought was interesting.
Mm-hmm. Situation we'll keep monitoring. Let's turn to Packers-Saints. Packers favored by 2 points right now. I'm actually a little bit surprised by that. I'll get your take in a little bit. Game total is 43. Jordan Love regression is coming, people. You heard it here first. He is pacing to throw for 442 pass attempts this year, 26 per game. That is pretty much what the Falcons were doing last year. He's going to throw at this pace for just over 3,300 yards. That's not exciting. But he is pacing for 51 passing touchdowns and no interceptions. He has scored 20 fantasy points in both weeks. I don't think he's a fantasy quarterback 1 rest of season. My expected fantasy points model has him at quarterback 26 per game through 2 weeks. You might be like, that sounds ridiculous when he's currently the QB 4. Guys, if you're throwing 26 times a game and running 2 times a game, you're probably not going to score many fantasy points in the long haul. And I think he's better than QB 26, considering he's going to be getting Christian Watson back. I'm still not convinced this is an every week top 12 quarterback option. A.J. Dillon was the workhorse in this game with no Aaron Jones. We'll keep monitoring the Jones hamstring injury. And tomorrow on the Waiver Wire Show, we will discuss rookie receiver Jaden Reed. What else do you want to add here on the Packers? And what did you think about this line of Packers favored by 2? I would have kind of leaned that the Saints are a slightly better team right now.
Yeah, I think they probably are, and I also agree with you with Jordan Love. It's he had 140 passing yards this week. It's he had 3 touchdowns. I think the offense looks better in the box score than it does in reality to this point. They also played the Saints, or not the Saints, the Bears on opening day, which inflated some numbers. Yeah. Defensively, this is a tough matchup, I think, again, because they struggle against the run, and the Saints can run against them if they want. And then, my stance hasn't really changed on Green Bay. They have a very talented defense. That's the key to them being an efficient team. I'm surprised. I think it's because they're at home, and the Saints are a dome team, and this is one of the few road games they play the whole year. So I can see why the Packers were a small favorite, but, we'll see what happens tonight with New Orleans. But I'd lean the Saints way myself at this point.
Turning to the Saints, they're going to play tonight on Monday Night Football for week 2. We're both expecting a big day from Jamal Williams.
Yeah.
He had outrageous usage, all but 1 carry, tons of routes run for this backfield. Like everything lined up for him in week 1 except the fantasy points. But it's okay. He played the Titans. They just shut down Josh Kelly as well. I think the Titans are just a very strong defense against running backs. What are you going to be looking for in tonight's game? And did you like that I bet an alt line, a 5-1, that Rashid Shaheed reaches 75 receiving yards in tonight's contest?
Yeah, I think it's possible. That actually ties into what I'm looking for the most this week with the Saints is how their target distribution goes, because Michael Thomas, we know what he is. Slant boys have people have called him. He was fine in week 1, but Shaheed's an explosive player. So is Chris Olave. Kind of curious to see which one of them gets more deep shots. Could be equal. And, J.C. Horn's out for the Panthers, so secondary is definitely vulnerable for Carolina.
Let's turn now to the Seahawks against the Panthers. Seahawks favored by 4.5, coming off that very, very exciting win against the Lions. It reminded me of, was it, oh God, 2 years ago when they, was it last year when they both had 30 something points in the game and everyone went nuts. And that
the Jordan Vanning, no, the Jordan Vanning.
That was last year, right?
Yeah, that was last year, and they both had in the 40s. I think it was 48, 45.
Okay.
Yep.
I was waiting for some back and forth because all these games blend together. At a certain point, I was like, I think this was last year, but if you told me it was 2 years ago, I would have just accepted it.
Yeah.
Anyway, the game total for this one's pretty low. I think we can blame the Panthers here. It's at 42.5. The Seahawks offense rebounded. Ryan, we are not absolute idiots yet for liking the Seahawks. Geno Smith had over 325 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, 17 carries and 2 rushing touchdowns from Kenneth Walker. Tyler Lockett had 26 fantasy points. DK Metcalf, as we mentioned before, got hurt during the game. Didn't play that much and still had 6 catches for 75 yards. And Jackson Smith-Njigba is still not playing in 2 receiver sets. So I'm not excited to start him in fantasy yet. What else do you want to add here about the Seahawks? And did they restore some faith for you?
Yeah, I mean, they're a very talented team. As you said, this is similar to the Browns. As long as Geno Smith continues to be what he was last year, I mean, they have a shot in the NFC. And he's been very Jekyll and Hyde the first 2 games. He was a bit of a disaster in week 1 against the Rams. And, we can see the scoreboard. We can see the stats. They're all obviously positive. But what impressed me, I think this is the best game I've seen him in pressure management in Seattle. And if he continues at that clip, Seattle's a very dangerous team. And, I'm going to finish off with Kenneth Walker here. Continues to be the team's lead runner. Some good, some bad to his game. I think once the offensive line gets healthier, that'll benefit him specifically.
I think so too. If we turn to the Panthers, they're going to play tonight. I'm curious what the running back split looks like. I think Sanders is still the clear lead back, but he was really inefficient in week 1. Chuba just looked better at times. And then what does the wide receiver rotation look like with DJ Chark returning? Anything else you're looking for in tonight's game before we move on to our next one?
I mean, it's all about Bryce Young. That's the one and only guy I'll be looking for in the Panthers offense because ultimately, the quarterback's the most important position in sports. So this counts for every team. But since they have a very mediocre supporting cast, if Carolina is going to be competitive all this year, it's on Young's shoulders primarily.
Let's now turn to the Cardinals against the Cowboys. The spread is Cardinals plus 13, but if you like Dallas, you can get the Cowboys at minus 12.5 on MyBookie. Promo code 33rd team. Game totals at 44.5. I think we'd both agree that is being propped up because we think the Cowboys will score points.
Yeah.
Looking at the Cardinals, James Conner had a huge game. I think he's going to beat up the bad run defenses and struggle against the good ones like Dallas. Marquise Brown, I think, is going to be startable week to week when they have an easy matchup with Josh Dobbs. We saw Hollywood finally get in the box. 6 catches, 54 yards, and a touchdown on 10 targets. And then Zach Ertz now has 6 catches in back-to-back games. He is an every week fantasy starter for tight end. He was my tight end 8 this past week, and that hit very nicely. And I refuse to apologize for continuing to be infatuated with the dusty 32-year-old catch and fall tight end because at the end of the day, fantasy points are fantasy points, and the usage is outrageous. What did you see from the Cardinals when they nearly upset the Giants?
We mentioned it before. Josh Dobbs legitimately looked like Tom Brady in the first half. He was legitimately really, really good. Specifically really good on intermediate crossers, which is Brady's bread and butter. It was. I probably have to go rewatch it again just to make sure it was reality, but it was encouraging. Different environment against the Cowboys pass rush this week. Cardinals offensive line played pretty well in both phases against the Giants, but again, Dallas is a much different animal. And I'll also say this, the Cardinals defense gave up 31 points in the second half. They came unglued. No real, 2 ways about that. And the Cowboys offense has been pretty good to this point. So Arizona could get smoked in this contest.
They really could. If we look at the Cowboys, Tony Pollard is now averaging 20 carries and 5.5 targets a game. That is the best role in all of fantasy for any running back. I talked last week about how Jake Ferguson was piquing my interest. I was disappointed this past week. He still didn't run 20 routes in the game last week. The per route usage is exciting. The actual volume is not there. It's starting to feel a little bit like a Kyle Pitts situation. Well, let me mute myself. There is a fire drill. Ryan, I'll pass to you for the Cowboys.
Okay. Looks like the show's on me, ladies and gentlemen, due to that unexpected fire drill. So for the Cowboys, they destroyed two volatile offensive lines 2 weeks in a row. They get another one in week 3 in Arizona. I don't think Josh Dobbs is the new Tom Brady, so we can expect a little regression there. What's been lost through the first 2 games, though, because the defense has been so dominant, is that the offense has also been a pretty high quality unit. And, we saw last week Daniel Jones absolutely shredded the Arizona Cardinals for 31 points in the second half of that contest. So Dallas has a huge ceiling in this game. I think everyone expects them to run away with this one, but all signs point to that in reality.
Why don't you introduce Chiefs Bears, because the fire alarm is still going on.
Just give me a thumbs up when we're good, man. Chiefs Bears spread. Chiefs are 13-point favorites. If you like Kansas City, you can get them at minus 12.5 on my bookie. Totals 49 points for this contest. We're going to skip the Chiefs stats because Josh is the stat guy and I'm the film guy. So we're going to jump right into film analysis here. Chiefs defense gave up 14 points to the Lions on opening night. They gave up 9 to the Jaguars, and the Jaguars have a pretty loaded offense with a potential MVP. Let's actually put it this way. Trevor Lawrence is eventually going to win an NFL MVP as a Jaguar. So holding them to 9 points was very good. Mahomes is still Mahomes, but his offense lacks dynamic playmakers. Travis Kelce was back in the fold. He didn't have a big game. Sky Moore was better. Kadarius Toney was better, but still not really a whole lot to get excited about with Kansas City's offense this week. Now, on the other side of things, they play the Bears. And the Bears, Josh, the Bears. Not much enthusiasm in Chicago for any Bears fans. This is a situation where this locker room could have some trouble after this week. It's been a mess on offense 2 weeks in a row. They've lost 2 games against mediocre opponents pretty decisively. And when I watch these games, this isn't about being effective or not. There's always a couple teams every year where I can't tell what the offense's plan is. And that's been the case in each of Chicago's first 2 games. I'm sure it's frustrating for the players. Now they get Kansas City on the road, where Kansas City's in a position of, Kansas City hasn't even played their best game yet. So this is a correction spot for them in that sense. And if the Chiefs roll the Bears, I could see this season becoming a runaway train for Chicago potentially after this contest. Now let's get into the primetime games. There's 3 of them again this week, 2 Monday nighters. The Raiders versus the Steelers. Raiders are 1-point underdogs at home. Game totals 44. Back to reality last week for Vegas with Buffalo. I think the final was 38-10. Josh Allen and company took care of business. Not a big surprise. Ben Wolbe took Jimmy G's under passing yards. That hit. I tailed him on that one. And here's the thing with Jimmy G. It's a lot harder to be a quarterback like that. That's more of a game manager when your defense is giving up 38 points to a team like Buffalo. Hard for them to stay in it. They didn't. Game was over pretty early. Right now, I feel like I have a pretty good read on the Raiders. I actually thought they might go into Denver and beat them. I thought the Bills were a virtual lock in survivor pools this week. And this coming week against the Steelers again. Pittsburgh plays tonight, so maybe some things will change. But if Pittsburgh starts 0-2 specifically, this looks like a loss for the Raiders to me. I'll probably actually play the Steelers in my tournaments if this game basically stays as a pick 'em. For Pittsburgh tonight, I'm looking for 2 things. I want to see if their pass rush is still effective and their front's still effective without Cameron Hayward. And how's the offensive line against that Browns pass rush that derailed the game against the Bengals? 2 Monday night games. 2 Monday night games this week, too. I don't know why we have 2 Monday night games 2 weeks in a row, but here we go. Buccaneers versus Eagles. Buccaneers are 6.5-point underdogs against the defending NFC champs. Game total of this game's 46.5. If you like the over in this contest, my bookie has the total for this game at 44.5. We like line shopping here. That's a good value play. Now, for the Buccaneers, this is one of the reasons why I watch the games every week. Baker Mayfield threw a drop pick 6 on his first throw of the game this week. Brisker dropped it on their end of the field. Would have changed the whole complexion of this game. Same drive. Mayfield missed a wide open touchdown that led to a field goal in the first drive. The defense has been very good. Mike Evans has been great, which is awesome to see. I mean, talk about one of the most consistent veteran wide receivers really ever. But I have confidence in the defense. I don't really have very much confidence in Baker Mayfield's offense still. Now, to go to the Eagles, I think this is a correction spot for Tampa Bay against the Philadelphia Eagles defense. I think their interior duo of Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis could create some real havoc for Tampa Bay specifically. And on the offensive side of the ball, Love the adaptive play calling from Philadelphia at this point. Like we talked about before, Minnesota was showing them a lot of soft fronts. Philly kept running the ball. DeAndre Swift had a monster game. So one of the things I like with play callers in general is, one, you want to plan, and two, like if the defense is giving you something, are you going to adapt and take it? We can count on Philadelphia to do that now with Shane Steichen in Indianapolis. So that's a positive for us going forward with them. Last game on the slate, Bengals versus Rams. This one's later on Monday night. Joe Burrow's not exactly a lock to play in this game, so that's the big one here. Bengals right now are minus 3.5 favorites. That means that sportsbooks, at least this tells me that sportsbooks are leaning towards him playing. They don't have it off the board currently. Totals 44.5. If Burrow plays, that actually strikes me as pretty low. Like I will probably play the over if Burrow plays, if it stays at that number. Here's the thing for the Bengals. For most of the first 6 quarters of this season, their offense was non-functional. Granted, they played 2 division rivals with good defenses in Cleveland and Baltimore. That doesn't mean panic mode for me. They bounced back in the second half against the Ravens last week. T. Higgins had a pretty good game. Jamar Chase is still looking for an eruption spot. And now they get the Rams, who have, I'll say, even in their loss to San Francisco last week, have overachieved, especially on defense for me. Not Matthew Stafford's awesome, plain and simple. So that doesn't really surprise me. What he's getting out of Kyron Williams, who our waiver guy Nick Bodiford loved last year and is obviously was on him earlier this year too. And what they're getting out of Puka Nacua, Nick was on him too. The volume's just been outrageous. I don't really like the Robert Woods comparison because stylistically they're not really similar players. However, Anquan Bolden got off to a fast start in his career. They compared him statistically to Puka Nacua a couple times yesterday, and stylistically, thick, physical, reliable players. I actually think that's a pretty good comparison. Best case scenario for Puka Nacua, Anquan Bolden type player. That's pretty good. Obviously, nothing but positive things to say about him. Wish I was more as on him as Nick was this year. And then, here's the other thing. The Rams gave up 30 points last week. As odd as this is to say, I still think their defense overachieved a little bit considering the parks they have. I think this is a bounce back spot for Cincinnati as long as Joe Burrow is back on track.
Yeah, let me, now that the fire drill has ended, which I would love if my complex let me know of these ahead of time.
Yeah.
I'll drop a few stats for some of the games that Ryan very admirably was covering solo. Chiefs, Bears, a couple things to drop. I'm still not starting the Kansas City running backs. It's still some type of committee. Travis Kelce's stat line didn't look good in week 1, but he led the team in targets with 9. No other player on the Chiefs had more than 5 in that game. I'd say Kelce, I think he's back. I'm not too concerned rest of season. Sky Moore looks like a great sell. 3 catches, 70 yards and a touchdown, but he had only 4 targets. He has now been targeted on just 11% of his routes through 2 weeks. You want that number closer to 20%. Both games were the same story where it's basically 1 in 10 routes that Sky Moore runs, something happens. That is just simply unacceptable rest of season. And I am trending towards him being a big sell. With the Bears, I think Ryan nailed it. I'm just very, very concerned with this team on both offense and defense. Turning to Raiders, Steelers. Steelers play tonight, as Ryan mentioned. For the Raiders, Josh Jacobs had 9 carries for -2 yards, but he had 5 catches and 51 yards receiving. Week 3 looks like another brutal matchup with the Steelers, but I think we're hoping the fantasy day can be salvaged again with his pass game involvement. And then with the Bucs Eagles, Rachaad White had a great game. The box score was good. He looked a lot better than week 1. Mike Evans looked great against the Bears, but I think ultimately Chicago looks like the number 1 secondary to target for fantasy, for DFS, for alt lines and betting, yada, yada. We want to essentially target the Bears. With the Eagles, DeAndre Swift had 28 carries, 175 yards, and a touchdown. I think Gainwell is going to be playing behind Swift rest of season. If you think I'm wrong on that, let me know in the comments. But I'm pretty confident at this point that the dynamic player that you and I were excited for this year came to life in that game. And then with Bengals Rams, Joe Mixon is an incredible buy low in fantasy. He's an absolute bell cow. And I think once the offense improves, since I think we both expect it to improve, he's going to be scoring an absolute truckload of fantasy points. It is clear that the team does not trust Travion Williams very much. And it is clear that they don't necessarily trust Chris Evans that much, who's also been dealing with injuries. And then on the Rams end, what Puka Nacua has done is truly historic. His week 1 was so good, and then his week 2 was better. He had 20 targets yesterday. That is a number that very few elite receivers ever reach in a game ever, and he did that in his second game. One note, Ryan, I'm going to kick this to you to get your thoughts on it. Maybe it's because I'm coping with not liking Puka Nacua enough, but Tutu Atwell has averaged 98 receiving yards to Puka's 133 through 2 weeks on half the targets per game. When Cooper Kupp returns, is that some kind of light at the end of the tunnel for Tutu where he can get there with target efficiency? Or do you think Puka's start has been so good that at this point, you don't view Cooper Kupp as the slam dunk, like best fantasy receiver, like he's been the past 2 years when healthy for his return? Since that's something that I think we really want to be able to get right, is what does the usage look like when Kupp returns, probably in week 5?
That's a great question, actually. Let me answer it in 3 sections. Section 1 is Cooper Kupp's a better route runner than Puka Nacua, more versatile player. A lot of Nakua's usage has come in the short game. So I think as long as he's healthy and still Cooper Kupp, he'll walk right back in and take the crown on this offense. I do think Nacua is going to be a factor going forward. There's no way you can give a guy this kind of workload and he gives you these kind of dividends and just be like, all right, dude, you're going back to the bench now. I don't think that's not how you run a program. That's not how Sean McVay's a very smart guy. But I do think instead of 15 targets, maybe we're talking like 7, 6, 8 type stuff. And here's the thing. My favorite part of this question is, I think Atwell's usage is going to stabilize because he's fast. He has a different skill set than those two. Where Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua they're both more possession receivers. Where Atwell's speed's different. So why would they change the speed element of the offense? Where I would think that Van Jefferson's done once Cooper Kupp comes back, though.
That's kind of what I was thinking as well. Last note is that Kyren Williams is a bell cow. He was in week 2. Yeah. Akers is going to get traded. I think Minnesota and your actual New York Football Giants with Saquon's ankle injury make the most sense to me right now. Is there any teams off the top of your head that you can think of, or you think Minnesota Giants sound like reasonable trade candidates for you?
I mean, for what, a 7th rounder? I
was going to say, not that any team wants Akers.
Yeah, I've never really been a big Cam Akers guy, but yeah, the Giants are in pretty dire straits right now. It would make sense. It would.
Now, guys, apologies again for that fire drill that we were part of. I actually have a fire take that Ryan will set me up for to get us out of here. But before that, reminder to follow Ryan at Ryan Reynolds NFL on Twitter. All of his game previews are going to be coming out starting tomorrow on the33rdteam.com for week 3. My fantasy rankings with player write-ups are going to be up on the site early tomorrow afternoon. Make sure you're on the lookout for that. And hop into the 33rd Team Discord. It's free. Prop bets, start sit analysis, trade advice, DFS showdown advice. Just a general question that you have for Ryan, me, Jordan, Ben Wolby, anyone else on the team. That is the best place to drop that in. We have grown by nearly 1,500 members the past 2 weeks. Outrageous growth, and I think there's a reason why. What we're giving you for free in there is simply unparalleled at this point. Whew. All right, Ryan, I'm ready.
All right, Josh. Last week, you sent us off with DeAndre Swift's going to have 20-plus fantasy points. He ran for 170 yards, basically carried the Eagles' offense. It's week 3 now. Give us a bold prediction for this slate.
So Jamar Chase has 9 and then 8 targets through those first 2 games. The Bengals offense has looked non-functional, but as we mentioned before, they get a Rams defense that I think is going to get shredded. Assuming Joe Burrow plays, this is the 10-catch, 150-yard, 2-touchdown week from Jamar Chase to get him back on track.